Earth forces, do you copy? Defensive grid is holding. All teams stand by. They think they've won. Static crackled, laced with distant gunfire. Somewhere deep in the ruins of Earth's once thriving metropolis, General Marcus Vex pressed his back against a fractured wall, his breathing slow and measured. His left eye was swollen shut, blood creeping down his cheek in sluggish rivers. Smoke curled in every direction, clinging to his skin like a shroud. The air burned with the metallic tang of pulverized steel, the ashen breath of fallen buildings choking the sky. All Dominion channels are active, sir. They're broadcasting our extinction as if it were already written. Vex wiped his mouth, eyes narrowing at the ruined skyline ahead. Towers that once kissed the stratosphere lay crippled, their skeletal remains groaning under their own weight. The Dominion had come as they always did, merciless, calculated, assured of their supremacy. Yet as the largest fleet in their empire's history encircled Earth like a noose, a transmission cut through every Dominion channel with an undeniable chill. The fleet's officers, bred for war and programmed for certainty, stiffened as the face of their supposed victim filled their screens. Blood-streaked, battle-worn, unbroken. Attention, Varicon Dominion! A silence fell, thick and unnatural. Every bridge, every war room, every Dominion soldier standing over the bodies of their slain enemies turned toward the transmission. You have sealed your fate. Commander Zalvran exhaled sharply through his secondary throat, mandibles tightening. His towering frame, clad in ceremonial battle plating, cast a jagged silhouette against the star field beyond. The Dominion had crushed worlds older and stronger than this backwater rock. No species had ever defied their fate, not for long. And yet, something in the human's gaze felt wrong. Sir, one of his officers muttered, voice unusually hesitant, we should have received planetary destruction confirmation by now. Run a diagnostic, Zalvran ordered, though the words tasted bitter. The planetary disassembly beam, a weapon engineered to dismantle a planet at the molecular level, had already fired. There should be nothing left below but drifting particles. Instead, the planet still turned, its scars fresh, but defiant. Commander! The warlord turned. The tactical officer's violet eyes were wide. The beam had fired. The calculations were correct. The physics were sound. And yet Earth was still there. The Dominion's bridge, once pulsing with the quiet rhythm of victory, was now a tangle of whispers, the static-filled murmurs of unease creeping like vines through its ranks. Then, the impossible happened. The ground retaliated. Bright lances of blue erupted from Earth's surface, clawing toward the sky. Not desperate, frantic shots, but calculated bursts of firepower tearing through the Dominion's low-orbit sentries with merciless efficiency. Railgun arrays, far more advanced than Dominion intelligence had anticipated, erupted from the depths of shattered cities, their payloads slamming into the hulls of descending dropships with brutal force. The sky, once a canvas of Dominion dominance, became an execution ground. Ships screamed as they buckled, imploded, and ruptured in flame. Entire regiments of Dominion forces obliterated before their boots could touch the earth. The orderly descent of troops twisted into a spiral of wreckage and shattered formations, torn apart before they even realized they were dying. Impossible, Zalvran whispered, watching his forces collapse in real time. Nothing about this was chance. This was planned. Across the war-torn ruins of Earth's once greatest cities, the Dominion's landing forces breached the urban labyrinth. They expected scattered resistance. They found kill zones. Crumbling towers had been engineered into labyrinths of death, debris arranged with surgical precision to funnel troops into dead-end avenues and collapse points. The very streets themselves detonated, swallowing entire battalions in carefully timed, controlled demolitions. Dominion officers barked orders, tried to regroup, but something else was happening. Their targeting systems, the pride of the Dominion's war machine, began to fail. One by one, Dominion weapons refused to fire, their locks vanishing, crosshairs flickering into useless static. An officer frantically pressed the firing mechanism on his plasma rifle. Nothing. He stared at it in disbelief as a human sniper's round found his throat. "Commander!" A voice gasped through the Dominion's fleet-wide communications. "Our AI targeting systems are shutting down. We're..." Static. Zalvran's mandibles twitched. He turned sharply toward his bridge crew, his mind racing. "Sir!" Admiral Veilcor's voice carried a note of something Zalvran had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. "We've lost complete tactical synchronization across all battlefronts. The humans, they're in our systems." The implication was absurd. Earth shouldn't even have the capability to decode basic Dominion communications, let alone override them in real time. And yet, Dominion drop pods malfunctioned mid-descent, turning them into coffins plummeting from the sky. Heavy armor suits locked up, leaving soldiers frozen, helpless as gunfire cut them down. War machines turned on their own, firing blindly at allies. The Dominion had not just walked into a battlefield. They had walked into a trap so intricately woven, so ruthlessly efficient, that they had never stood a chance. Across the bridge, the Dominion's command crew went still, their eyes glued to the main view screen as something even more impossible unfolded. Ships, human ships, hundreds of them, breaking through the stratosphere like predators surfacing from a dark sea. They should not exist. Earth had no known fleet of this scale. Yet here they were, emerging from hidden installations deep beneath Earth's surface, from caverns carved into the dead rock of the moon, from asteroids the Dominion had dismissed as barren. Humanity had never been helpless. They had never been behind. They had lured the Dominion into a war they had been preparing for generations. For the first time in his long and decorated history, Commander Zalvran knew fear. "Sir," Colonel Lutheran's voice crackled through the comms. He was trapped. His regiment had been slaughtered. Survivors were vanishing from Dominion tactical maps. "We've lost control of the battlefield." Zalvran clenched his fists. This was not how this war was supposed to go. He turned toward his officers, barking the only command that made sense. "Initiate fleet recalibration. Regroup. Reset. We will crush this resistance before it spreads." Admiral Veilcor, still pale, hesitated for a fraction of a second before giving the order. But before the first Dominion ship could reposition, before the tide could turn, a second transmission cut through their channels. General Marcus Vex was still there, still watching, and this time he was smiling. "You still don't understand, do you?" His voice was calm, too calm. "You were never the ones in control." Zalvran felt a chill trace down his spine as something new appeared on his screen. A countdown. "I told you." Vex's voice was a whisper now, edged in finality. "You have sealed your fate." A single number pulsed on every Dominion screen. A countdown. Zalvran's second heart drummed a frantic rhythm against his ribs as the numbers bled downward, each tick pressing an unseen weight against his chest. He had commanded fleets through planetary upheavals, orchestrated the extinction of civilizations that had challenged the Dominion's supremacy. But never, never, had he seen a species smile in the face of annihilation. The human's gaze remained locked on his, unshaken. "You were never the ones in control." Then, the fleet collapsed into chaos. Tactical overlays flickered, replacing familiar formations with unreadable static. Command pathways severed in cascading failures, Dominion warships blinking out of synchronization, their firepower misfiring or simply refusing to deploy. Zalvran's claws dug into the control panel as the Crimson Warden shuddered. Emergency protocols failed to respond. He barked orders, voice sharpened by disbelief. "Report!" A junior officer, scales dull with fear, turned, voice faltering. Our targeting systems are gone. Gone. The word tasted like ash. Non-functional. Ships are reporting weapon locks failing, guidance systems rebooting at random, and our fleet-wide synchronization? Severed. Sir, our formations are breaking apart. Zalvran's throat tightened. It was impossible. Dominion battle networks were fortified against cyber warfare. Every ship, every drop pod, every trooper's visor interfaced through a system that had conquered hundreds of worlds without failure. Yet Earth had unraveled it all. Below, Dominion forces, once an unshakable tide, turned into shattered pockets of resistance. Thousands of soldiers, stranded in hostile streets, their weapons inert, their orders unreadable. Human strike teams descended upon them like carrion birds upon a wounded beast. Dominion elites, genetically enhanced warriors bred for planetary subjugation, found themselves stripped of technological superiority. Their exoskeletal plating refused to respond, their integrated pulse rifles dead in their hands. The battlefield that should have been theirs had become a maze of death, a world where they no longer dictated the rules. Colonel Lutheran's voice clawed through the failing Dominion comms. Sir, we are being eradicated. Our armor has shut down. Our war machines are unresponsive. A hollow clatter interrupted him, the sound of a Dominion sidearm dropping. Surrender! Zalvran's mandibles clenched so hard they nearly cracked. He had never heard one of his own officers surrender. Yet, through the broken frequencies, he could hear Dominion captains calling for ceasefires, their forces outmatched not by numbers, but by a battlefield that had turned against them. He exhaled sharply. Find out how. A shadow moved at his periphery. Admiral Velcor. He stood motionless, his four hands clasped behind his back, unreadable gaze scanning the disarray. Of all his officers, Velcor had never been prone to panic, yet the stiffness in his posture carried an unease Zalvran had never seen before. Admiral. Velcor spoke without turning. Sir, I need access to our intelligence reports on pre-invasion Earth surveillance. Zalvran frowned. Now? In the middle of a battlefield collapse? Explain. We assumed Earth was technologically behind us, Velcor said, voice measured. But assumptions are not fact. If the humans were prepared for this invasion, Zalvran's eyes darkened. You're suggesting they knew we were coming? Velcor finally met his gaze. Not fear, calculation. No, Commander. The Admiral's voice dropped. I'm suggesting they planned for it. A cold weight settled in Zalvran's chest. If that were true, if Earth had orchestrated this from the start, then the Dominion had walked into a war not of conquest, but of design. Zalvran's claws twitched over the command interface, bringing up Earth's archived surveillance logs. Velcor moved beside him, scanning the data streams with the silence of a man, searching for the final thread in an unraveling truth. The files poured onto the screen. The deception was flawless. Satellite footage, fabricated, industrial reports, engineered for deception. Global scientific progress, staged to appear centuries behind. Zalvran's throat dried. They had been watching a mirage. Earth's technological advancements were never what they seemed. Every failed breakthrough, every scientific limitation, every flaw in their global infrastructure, all planted falsehoods. They had spent decades concealing their true capabilities, presenting just enough advancement to appear weak, just enough limitation to keep the Dominion from fearing them. And when the invasion came, they didn't scramble to react. They executed a plan that had already been in place. A silence stretched over the bridge as the realization sank into every officer standing there. Zalvran's second heart gave a slow, thunderous beat. The Dominion had never encountered an enemy that wanted to be invaded. A muted alarm pulsed through the control panel. Incoming transmission. He already knew who it would be. Marcus Vex's face reappeared. The gash over his brow dried now, his posture still unshaken. The cityscape behind him had changed, no longer a picture of destruction, but a fortress under his command, the war moving exactly as he had dictated. "Are you understanding it now, Commander?" Zalvran said nothing. "You were never fighting a desperate enemy." Vex tilted his head slightly, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You were marching into an execution chamber built specifically for you." Zalvran's fingers curled into his palm. For the first time in his career, he had no counter-move. Vex exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as if peering through him, through his failures, through the shattered remains of an empire that had never faced a war they did not control. "The Dominion prides itself on strategic superiority," Vex murmured, "but you never once stopped to consider that we weren't an anomaly, that we weren't some outlier species that lucked into survival." His voice hardened. "You never thought we were the threat." Zalvran could feel the weight of those words, pressing into the space between them like a blade being driven into soft flesh. "And that—" Vex exhaled, rolling his shoulders, relaxed at ease. "That is why you have already lost." The transmission cut. Zalvran stared at the empty screen. The quiet on the bridge stretched into something suffocating. Velkor inhaled deeply beside him, hands tightening behind his back. Not in fear, in certainty. "Sir," the Admiral said slowly, grimly, "I believe the Dominion has made a catastrophic miscalculation." Zalvran remained still. There was no response to give, because he already knew it was true. Zalvran's talons pressed against the cold surface of the command panel, his reflection caught in the fractured light of the Dominion flagship's flickering display. The silence in the bridge was heavy, not with contemplation, but with something far more dangerous: realization. His officers stood frozen at their stations, unwilling to be the first to speak. Not because of fear for their commander's wrath, but because they, too, now understood. The Dominion had never been the predator. It had been the prey all along. A muted signal pulsed across the tactical interface. At first, it was a flicker, a mere anomaly in the vast network of Dominion fleet systems. But then it spread, cascading in pulses of corrupted data, overriding firewalls, rewriting operating protocols, and turning the Dominion's once unshakable battle network into a labyrinth of unfamiliar code. Velkor's jaw tightened. "They're erasing us from our own systems." Zalvran's gaze never left the spiraling streams of data. Entire segments of their battle formations were dissolving before his eyes, blinking out as if the ships themselves had ceased to exist. A Dominion destroyer, one of their most formidable capital ships, drifted in the black like a carcass left for scavengers. Its reactor lights flickered weakly, casting a ghostly glow against the thick hull plating. For a moment, it seemed as if it were simply dead in the water. Then, with eerie precision, its forward cannons tilted against its own allies. "Impossible," one of the tactical officers whispered. Velkor's fingers curled at his sides. "They're not just disabling us." He exhaled, voice weighted with reluctant awe. "They're taking us apart." The Dominion battleship fired, not at Earth, not at its enemies, but at its own fleet. Zalvran's second heart thundered as a chain reaction of Dominion ships turned in unison, their guns belching fire into formations that had once stood untouchable. What had once been a ruthless armada of conquest had become a blind beast, devouring itself. And then, Earth moved. From the shadow of the battered planet, shapes emerged. Vessels that should not exist, not scattered, desperate warships, not crude, repurposed planetary defense rigs. These were war machines. Sleek constructs of impossible metallurgy, their angular hulls dark against the abyss, marked with weapon signatures that defied every known Dominion classification. They did not belong to the species the Dominion had deemed unworthy of galactic recognition. They belonged to something far more advanced. Zalvran's fingers clenched into his palm. "What is this?" Velkor's stare was locked onto the advancing fleet, his skin paled to an unnatural shade. "Sir, those ships aren't in any of our records." Zalvran knew, because they were never meant to be recorded. A deep, crushing force swept through the Dominion fleet. Ships lurched, their hulls bending as if caught in a gravitational tide they couldn't escape. A Dominion carrier, still attempting to reorient itself from the chaos, shattered down its midsection, its titanium plating splintering as if torn apart by an unseen force. Then, the first gravimetric rippers fired. The Dominion had spent centuries developing shields against kinetic weaponry, plasma-based arms, and directed energy bursts. But nothing in their arsenal had been designed to counter weapons that distorted the very fabric of space. The rippers didn't fire in beams, nor in visible trajectories. There was no glow of energy, no trace of heat, no streaks of missiles cutting through the black. Instead, Dominion warships simply came apart. Some imploded inward, their mass crushed into infinitesimal points before winking out of existence. Others stretched unnaturally, as if being peeled from reality itself, their hulls curling in spiraled distortions before vanishing in shuddering bursts of displaced matter. Zalvran's claws scraped against his console. His fleet was not being destroyed. It was being unmade. Dominion vessels scattered in a desperate bid for survival, their formations now nothing but fractured pockets of disorder, each ship attempting to re-establish connection with the dying battle network. But the humans knew. They anticipated every counter-maneuver, moving not with reactionary tactics, but with the precision of a predator guiding its prey into the final snare. Zalvran turned sharply. "Issue a full retreat!" A sharp tone cut through his command. A transmission, not from Earth, not from the Dominion, from somewhere else. The bridge lights dimmed as an unfamiliar frequency invaded Dominion comms. Its sound deeper than a transmission had any right to be, a resonance that rippled beneath the skin like something alive. The Dominion fleet wasn't just losing a battle. Something else was watching, something that had never meant for them to win. Zalvran knew what it was before the voice even spoke, because he had heard stories, because he had read records of civilizations far older than his own, records that ended in silence. The voice was not human. Enough. The Dominion's fleet-wide network recovered in an instant. The failing ship systems blinked back online, targeting arrays restoring, fire control stabilizing. But it was not victory. It was something worse. The Ikarian Watchers had arrived, and they had not come to help the Dominion. Zalvran's breath was slow, deliberate. The Dominion had spent millennia at the top of the galactic food chain, but there had always been whispers, hints of something older. Velkor's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "I never thought they were real." Zalvran's mandibles tightened. "We should have never been allowed to believe otherwise." The Ikarian fleet emerged from beyond the moon's shadow, their ships eerily different from both human and Dominion designs. Their hulls did not reflect light. They did not move with the predictable propulsion of known starcraft. They simply existed, as if the fabric of space itself bent to accommodate their presence. And then a second transmission pulsed through the Dominion's network. This time, it wasn't for them. It was for Earth. Zalvran's breath came slow, because he wasn't sure who should be more afraid, the Dominion or the humans. Because for the first time since this battle had begun, Earth did not respond. Zalvran's breath was a slow, deliberate draw, as he stood at the center of his bridge, gaze locked onto the eerie spectacle beyond the viewport. The Ikarian Watchers had arrived, their fleet materializing from the abyss like phantoms stepping through a veil. Impossible vessels, their hulls neither reflecting light nor absorbing it, hung in a formation that defied gravitational logic, motionless yet somehow oppressive, as if the void itself had bent to accommodate them. And Earth was silent. Not a single transmission, not a pulse of retaliation, no frantic attempts to readjust their attack patterns. The humans, who had turned the Dominion's own weapons against them, who had predicted every move before it was made, now stood frozen in the eye of an approaching storm. Zalvran's claws flexed at his sides. Something was deeply wrong. A ripple moved through the Watcher's fleet. Not through thrusters, not through propulsion of any recognizable kind. They shifted without inertia, without acceleration, as though they were merely thoughts given form. The Dominion bridge officers spoke in hushed tones, their voices brittle. No one had ever seen the Icarian intervene. There were stories, myths, unconfirmed records, but never had they made their presence known. "Why now?" Velcor murmured, his normally sharp tone softened, almost reverent. "They've ignored every Dominion conquest before this one. What makes Earth different?" Zalvran's mandibles clicked in irritation. He didn't like rhetorical questions. He liked answers. The silence was shattered by a transmission. Not from the Dominion, not from Earth, from the Icarian. "You have tampered with what was never yours to wield." The Dominion officers stiffened, the weight of the voice pressing into them, not through sound waves, not through communication relays, but through something deeper, an impression, a resonance that bypassed the eardrum and settled directly into the brain. "Your war ends now." The words carried a finality that sent a tremor through the bridge, yet something about them unsettled Zalvran in a way he could not name. It was not a warning. It was a verdict. He turned sharply toward Velcor. "What do they mean, tampered?" The Admiral did not answer. His attention was fixed on the human fleet. And for the first time, Zalvran saw it. Not panic, not confusion, recognition. The humans knew exactly what this was. A second ripple moved through the Icarian fleet. A vibration through the void, not physical, but something deeper. Then without sound, without propulsion, the first Icarian ship moved. Not toward the Dominion, toward Earth. Zalvran's secondary throat tightened. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't retaliation. It was a claim. Velcor exhaled, voice low. They were never trying to conquer Earth. Zalvran turned sharply. "What are you saying?" The Admiral's gaze darkened. They were waiting for something. Aboard the Earth flagship Obsidian Hand, General Marcus Vex stood in silence, eyes locked on the view before him. His officers murmured in uneasy tones, fingers poised over battle stations, awaiting a command he did not yet give. He did not move. Because he understood something the Dominion did not. The Icarian had never been indifferent to Earth's survival. They had been waiting for it to reach a specific moment in history. And now, they had come to collect. They knew. Velcor's voice was quiet, as though speaking the words too loudly would force them into reality. They always knew. Zalvran's claws dug into the metal railing. Knew what? Velcor turned, and for the first time since this war began, his expression carried the weight of true horror. That Earth was never meant to belong to itself. The Icarian ship drew closer, a force neither hostile nor welcoming, but inevitable. The Dominion had been fighting the wrong war. This was never about conquest, never about territory, never about resources. This was about ownership, and Earth had never belonged to humans to begin with. Zalvran's mind burned with the implications. The Dominion had been nothing more than an actor in a play written long before they ever set eyes on this world. A cold realization settled in his gut. If Earth was theirs, he murmured, why did they wait until now? A new transmission surged through the network, this time from the humans. Vex's voice cut through the silence, unshaken. Because we forced their hand. Zalvran's brow furrowed. What does that mean? The general exhaled, slow, measured, as if finally allowing himself to acknowledge a truth he had long understood. We were never supposed to evolve this quickly. The words hung in the air, and for a fleeting second, no one spoke. Not the Dominion, not the Icarian, not even the humans. Then, the Watchers moved. Not in an offensive maneuver, not in a diplomatic gesture, but in something that felt far, far worse. A claim was being laid, and for the first time since this war began, Vex issued a retreat. All Earth vessels fall back. Now. A flicker of movement in the Icarian ranks. Zalvran saw it too late. They weren't allowing an escape. They were closing the door, and the Dominion had just become trapped inside. The true battle was about to begin. The door was closing. Zalvran saw it before his fleet could react. The Icarian vessels shifted as though they had always belonged to this moment, sealing the Dominion inside a battlefield that was no longer theirs to command. Their movements were neither hostile nor defensive, but conclusive. This war was no longer a struggle for victory. It was an execution, and Earth was retreating. Vex's order had gone through. Every human warship was falling back, breaking formation, abandoning the kill zone where Dominion forces were still scrambling to regain order. But Zalvran was no fool. This was not fear. This was not surrender. This was a controlled withdrawal. He had seen it before, species that realized they had lost the battle, clawing desperately for an escape before the Dominion crushed them beneath their own arrogance. But this time, the weight in his chest told him otherwise. This was not an escape. This was strategy. The tactical display flickered, struggling to stabilize under the interference of Icarian technology. The Dominion fleet, crippled, confused, splintered by its own failures, stood fractured between two enemies it had never anticipated fighting at once. A voice cut through the comms. "I warned you." Vex's transmission wasn't a gloat. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It was a eulogy. Zalvran's hands tightened against the control panel, claws pressing into the reinforced surface. He had spent his life dismantling civilizations, unraveling their weaknesses, ensuring their submission before they ever had the chance to resist. But now, staring at the shifting silence of the Icarian fleet and the methodical withdrawal of Earth's warships, he realized he had never truly understood what it meant to be outmatched. "You were never meant to win this war, warlord," Vex continued, calm, unreadable. "Because this war was never about you." Zalvran's second heart slammed against his ribs. The Icarian ship stopped moving. For a single, unbearable second, the void itself felt poised on the edge of something immeasurable. The weight of it settled deep in Zalvran's chest, sinking into marrow, burrowing into the very fabric of what he understood about power, about dominance, about the inevitability of the Dominion's control. And then, without warning, the first Icarian vessel fired. It wasn't an energy weapon. It wasn't kinetic artillery. It was something that didn't belong in any known classification of warfare. The space between two Dominion ships ruptured, folding inward with a sickening collapse of reality itself, their hulls twisting into unnatural angles before vanishing entirely. Zalvran couldn't breathe. This wasn't destruction. This was erasure. Dominion battlecruisers vanished in an instant. Not in fire or debris, but in absence, as if they had never existed to begin with. Whole squadrons blinked out, their matter devoured by something deeper than weaponry, something beyond physics, something that the Dominion had never prepared to fight. Zalvran's officers were shouting now. Panic, not discipline. Reports came in rapid bursts, each one worse than the last. Entire sectors of the fleet gone, systems failing without any identifiable cause. Ships turned to dust before their captains could even comprehend what had happened. "Sir!" Velkor's voice cut through the chaos, but his eyes were no longer on the Icarian. Zalvran followed his gaze, Earth's fleet had stopped retreating, and they were watching, not interfering, not firing, watching, as if they already knew how this would end. Zalvran's breath came slow, heavy, deliberate. His entire life had been dedicated to the inevitability of Dominion supremacy. Every war a lesson, every victory another testament to their empire's dominance. And yet here, now, at the end of everything, he was the one being observed. "The Icarian never cared about your conquest," Vex's voice returned, still composed, still unshaken. "They never intervened because you were never the threat." Zalvran's throat tightened. "We were?" It hit him then, like the weight of an entire empire collapsing at once. This wasn't about Dominion control. This wasn't about humanity's survival. This was about containment. The Icarian had been waiting, not to save Earth, not to defend the galaxy, but to ensure that humanity never surpassed the threshold they were never meant to reach. And the Dominion? They had played right into it. Zalvran inhaled sharply, mandibles tightening as the last remnants of his fleet fired in vain, their weapons doing nothing against the silent execution unfolding before them. "Call for retreat," Velcor muttered, his voice low. Zalvran didn't answer, because there was nowhere left to retreat to. A Dominion dreadnought, once the pride of their imperial war machine, was devoured in an instant, its structure folding inward, its energy dissolving into nothing. No debris, no wreckage, just absence. Zalvran exhaled slowly, his grip loosening. This was never our war to win. Velcor's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The tactical displays were crumbling. The fleet was crumbling. And in the distance, the human fleet remained unmoving, watching as the last remnants of the Dominion's power disintegrated. Zalvran's claws tapped the control panel, his mind calculating the inevitable. He had one final choice: to fight, or to do what no Dominion warlord had ever done before. He exhaled sharply. "Surrender." Velcor turned sharply. A pause, then a slow, firm nod. Across the battlefield, the last Dominion ships shut down their weapons, and Earth finally responded. The comms flickered once more. Vex's face remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes now. Not victory, not relief, understanding. "The galaxy watched as Earth was attacked," he said. A pause. "Now the galaxy will watch as we decide its fate." The Icarian ships halted. For the first time they hesitated. And Zalvran understood. Humanity had already won, not through numbers, not through force, but by proving something far more dangerous, that they were no longer a species waiting to be conquered. They were a species ready to rule, and the war was just beginning.